Hello. Welcome to Out of Turn, a YouTube channel about board games. I'm Justin, your host, and welcome to another episode of Playback. Playback is a series where I take a handful of games I've played recently and I review them. I let you know how they work, I let you know if they worked for me, and I let you know who I think they might work for. We're covering 6 games in today's video, so without further ado, let's get going. The first game I'm going to talk about today is a family-friendly dice drafting game called Sagrada. Sagrada is a game that takes about half an hour to play. The base game's for 1 to 4 players. There's also an expansion that bumps that up to a 6-player count and includes some extra components. That is the version I have. As I mentioned, Sagrada is a game where you will be drafting dice and placing them as a way of creating a stained glass window of sorts. Each player is going to have a unique board that they're placing their dice onto, and the board has some limitations on it. There are several colors of the dice, and basically as you're placing the dice on your board, there will be restrictions in certain spots where you can only place certain colors on each spot or place certain numbers on each spot. And as you're adding the dice to your board, you also have a general limitation that you cannot place the same color or number adjacent to each other. So you've got all these little rules as you try to build out your glass window. And there's also a few cards that go out that allow you to do like one-time special abilities. And there's a currency in the game, like these cool little clear bubble-looking stones that are a currency you can pay to use these abilities. So as I mentioned, this is sort of a family weight game. This is very much an entry level game. The mechanics of the game are really easy to wrap your head around. It really falls into that puzzle category, which is a category that I really enjoy. It's got a great visual presence as you're rolling all these different colored dice, adding them to your board and kind of creating this little multicolored one-time piece of art, if you will. All of that has a really great appeal. So it's a puzzle that doesn't break your brain, but it does present a little challenge. You're trying to score up some points, and I played this with my girlfriend and my daughter. My daughter's 10. This game was very easy for everyone to wrap their head around, and we really enjoyed it. It's a game that I want to get to the table a few more times, and I know I'm going to enjoy it. And it's one that I can recommend to anyone watching this video. That is Sagrada. Next up is On Tour, a roll and write game about designing the longest and most efficient route for your fake band's tour. So the game comes with 8 double-sided player boards, so up to 8 people can play. But if you have additional copies of the game, more people can play. There's really no limit. This is sort of a solitaire style game, meaning that your gameplay does not intersect or interact with any of the other players. So the way it works is you've got a map of either the United States or Europe, and all of the major locations on the map have little circles. And what you'll be doing is flipping cards that give you a few different options of where to fill out numbers on your tour, on your map. And you'll flip out 3 cards and they'll give you a region of the map. And then they'll also give you a specific location. So the region is an area that you have to write a number, but if you can get that number in the specific location on the card, you also get to circle it. And the reason that you would want to do that is because if your tour goes through that spot, then that spot's going to be worth double points for you. So you are basically creating higher point potential stops on your tour, but there's no guarantee that your tour will go through it. So you're going to roll 2 10-sided dice and you'll come up with 2 digits. And what you'll do is that'll give you 2 numbers to write down on your map on each turn. So you'll take, the number on die 1 and the number on die 2, and you'll have that number, and then you'll switch the digits and you'll have that number as well. So you just keep doing that until everyone's maps are completely filled up. And then what you're going to do is at the end of the game, you're going to draw a line to create your tour. And the way that works is you have to connect from one city or location to the next, it has to be an equal or higher number. So essentially, you are trying to build a route, a long route of increasing numbers. And this is a game that I've played a bunch of times already. It's become a favorite, a quick favorite of my daughter's. And in fact, I think she will be coming on a video soon to talk about it. And it's already immediately replaced two games that were in my collection, games that were actually in my top 50 videos. Roll to the Top, which is a game where you're rolling dice and filling in numbers and trying to be the first person to fill up your board. And then also Kokoro, Avenue of the Kodama, which is a game where you're flipping cards and those cards have shapes. And then you're putting those shapes on a little player board and trying to create paths. So On Tour is kind of a game that takes both of those ideas and marries them together in a way that really, really checks some boxes for us. Now, I'm not great at the game. I think I'm okay, but I always like to play ambitiously. I'm always trying to create a mega, mega long tour. And as a result, I usually end up with two tour routes that are okay, but neither one of them are better than my daughter's, for example. She's always hyper focused on just one route and making it as good as possible. Meanwhile, I'm creating two or three and trying to find a way to make them meet. Never works. But because this is a quick game and it really gets your gears turning, it's a game that we've played night after night multiple times. And it's not a game I would recommend for like small kids, but again, my daughter's 10 and she has no problem with this. So I think if you've got a mid-aged kid, and especially one who has played some like family weight games under their belt, this is going to be good for them. This is not going to be a game for everybody because not everybody likes stringing numbers together, but we really had fun with the concept. It's a game that's going to stay in our collection for a while. It's On Tour. All right, now let's talk about a card game called High Society. This game is for 3 to 5 players and it lasts around 20 to 30 minutes, right in our sweet spot. And this is a game, a bidding game where you are a rich person and you are trying to live the most extravagant life without going broke. So here's how it works. All the players start with a hand of cards that are basically your money for the game. And it is a finite hand. Everyone has the exact same cards, the exact same denominations, and you will not get more as the game goes. So there's a deck in the middle of the table, and you flip the top card, and then you start bidding. And of course, it's going to essentially have a point value. There's like some cute artwork on it that illustrates some sort of lavish activity or lifestyle choice, but ultimately you're playing for points. So you go around the table bidding on the card, trying to win it. Now, there's a couple of interesting wrinkles here, which is that once you've spent a card from your hand, that's going to really limit the amounts that you can bid. So, for example, if you've got, let's say like a 2, a 3, a 5, a 10, and a 20, we'll just go with those. Once you spend that 3, you've got to combine other cards to make more bids. So if your next bid from 5, if you wanted to bid, if someone bids 7, you can't bid 8 really unless you spend a whole bunch of cards because you already spent the 3. So you'd have to spend the 5, the 2, and the 1 to bid 8. So you really paint yourself into corners where your bids are going to be a lot higher than you want them to be because you're just really limited. And then there's one final twist, which is at the end of the game, the player who's spent the most money is automatically disqualified from winning. And that is a wrinkle that I love. That's a wrinkle that's in another game that I really love that it's actually in my top 10 called QE. That's a game where you can bid unlimited amounts of money on every turn, but again, the player who spends the most automatically loses. So that's a little twist on bidding that I really like. It worked well in this game. We played it a couple of times back to back because it was so short, and it's one of those games where you go after the first time, you're like, okay, I think I know how I could have done that better. And then if you're me, you do it worse. But that's the way games go sometimes. It was fun. I don't think it was our favorite, but we'll probably get a couple more plays out of it before we let go of it. I do think it's a nice casual game for people who like quick card games. This will be right in your sweet spot. Don't think it's going to become anyone's favorite game, but it's definitely worth a couple of plays. And it's fairly inexpensive as well. I think this could have made my under $20 list had I played it in time, but I recommend it anyway. Go check it out. High Society. Next up, I took another trip to the kids' table, had the nephew and nieces over, and my daughter and I pulled out Pyramid of Pengqueen, which is not a ridiculous name at all. But here's how it works. It is a one versus all game. So all of the players, except for one in this game, that's up to 6 players. All the players, except for one, are going to be treasure hunters, and they're going into this pyramid hunting for treasure. So they're actually going to have a hand of cards that has a type of treasure and a color. And there's a central player board that's actually up. Like imagine like Connect Four, like that kind of thing that's up. So all the treasure hunters are sitting on one side, and they can see sort of a mazy type thing where they can move little magnetic figures trying to reach their treasures. Now, on the other side of that board is the Pengqueen, which is like this penguin mummy who's trying to scare away the hunters and protect the treasure. So the player who's playing as the mummy cannot see where the treasure hunters are moving around on the board. Now, granted, once a treasure hunter claims a treasure, they announce where they are. So at that point, the Pengqueen does know where they are, but otherwise they're moving around just trying to catch the other hunters. And the way that works is obviously this is a magnetic board. So the mummy has a mover on their side, but there's also a magnetic piece on the treasure hunter side that goes along, that corresponds with it. So the treasure hunters do see where the Pengqueen is at all time. So there's a fun little tension, especially for little kids, as they see that little Pengqueen moving around. And just when it seems like it's about to hit them, it makes a turn, but someone goes, so then the Pengqueen knows they were really close. So they know on the next turn, they're going to try to track them down. Fun little tension for a kid's game. I do think it was a little long. It's like a 30 to 45-minute game. And we played it with, I think, 2 or 3 treasure hunters. And I think this is a game that falls under the more the merrier category. If you have more treasure hunters, the Pengqueen has a greater chance of catching someone. I think a lot of times, especially if it's a kid, it's going to be blind luck catching somebody. But the tension is still fun. I do worry about it being frustrating for the Pengqueen who never catches anyone. So I think if you can, it's probably a good idea to let the adult play as the Pengqueen and move it around and kind of scare the little kids, and also not care so much about winning, right? It's just about creating that tension and a fun gameplay experience. So if you can play under those circumstances, ideally, I really would recommend this for young kids. This is a game that my daughter asked for, and we picked up for her because it's set in the Ice Cool universe. And if you know anything about this channel, you know Ice Cool is an absolute favorite game in this household. I think Pengqueen skews younger than Ice Cool. There's not as much there for older players. So this is not a game that I'll be busting out with my friends during game days, but I hope to give it a few more spins at the kids' table. If you're looking for a great game for the little ones, I do recommend it. It's called Pyramid of Pengqueen for some strange reason. Our next game, I'm just going to mention briefly. I've talked about it on a couple of videos before. It's Patchwork. I'm bringing it up because I got to play it with my daughter for the first time. If you hadn't noticed, I was doing a lot of game playing with my daughter this session. But it's a two-player only game where you are basically um, collecting buttons as a currency in the game and spending them on these Tetris style pieces that are basically that you're basically adding to your quilt. You've got a little player board and you're basically trying to fill it up as much as you can with these Tetrisy pieces of patchwork quilt. And it's a game where you don't take turns in the strictest sense. Each piece that you buy costs a number of time units. So you move your pawn ahead on the time tracker, and whoever's farthest behind on the tracker, it's their turn. So you could get an awesome piece that really fits well in that corner that you were nervous about, but in the process you're going to let your opponent take 2 or 3 turns until you get to go again. So there's a nice push and pull there. This was a game that my girlfriend had played several times before and recommended it. And so we've played it together a couple times. And now I've played it with my daughter. She liked it. This is like a 30-minute, 2-player only game. I personally think this is a game that if you ever play 2-player games, you ought to keep this one in your collection. Again, it checks those boxes for me in a puzzly sense. But I also think you can pull this out with anyone. Say you want to play a quick game, and I'd be hard pressed to think of anybody who would just hate it. So add it to your 2-player collection if you haven't already. Patchwork. The last game I want to tell you guys about today is called Histrio. Histrio is a game for 2 to 5 players, takes around 45 minutes to play, and the story of the game is you are a bunch of anthropomorphized animals and you're trying to put on the best play for your king. And depending on how the game turns out, the king could be in the mood for a comedy or a tragedy. So, essentially, how gameplay works is each player has a hand of cards, 1 through 8, and then there's a central board with 8 locations. I think there are 8 cities, but it's just basically spots 1 through 8. And in each round, you're going to deal 1 card to each of those locations face up. And these cards will be actors, they might be performers, cards that essentially could get you points or manipulate the mood of the king. And I'll explain a little more on that in a minute. But once you've laid out cards, everyone's going to pick a location from their hand, like a number, basically representing which card or set of cards they'd like to draft. So once everybody picks, you reveal simultaneously. If you're the only person who's picked a number, you get to take any cards there and splay them out. And then you'll put a token there to represent that you've already taken from that. You will not be able to go back to that number for the rest of the season. And so it's interesting because as time, as the game plays on, you can see where the other players have been, so you can kind of strategically let cards pile up and maybe get a bigger score. And they can pile up because basically any city where the cards weren't taken, well, in the next round, when you deal out 1 more card to each number, you're just adding to what's already there. So while some are only going to have 1 card, but maybe it's a card you really need, 2 cities down, there might be 3 cards. And so maybe none of them are like the best cards, but it gives you a little more versatility. And you're basically trying to manipulate the king's mood. There is this really cool 3D stage that you set out as well. And it's got a little tracker on it that kind of, as you manipulate the king's mood, it could be pointing more into comedy or more into tragedy. And that's important because at the end of the season, whichever side the king's mood is in, that is the side that's going to score points. So you will actually look at all the cards that you've amassed over the season, and those cards are the ones that are going to score you points. So there's a few more wrinkles to the game, but that's the gist. We have played a few of these sort of simultaneous action selection games recently, and I think this may have been the one we enjoyed the most. We played it with three. It was my girlfriend and daughter again, much like the rest of this video. But I would be interested in playing it with a couple more people because, you know, while there were some instances of us going after the same city at the same time, mostly we got what we wanted most of the time. And while that's neat, and I know some people like a reduced player interaction or conflict, wouldn't really call this conflict, but you know, the idea of another player stepping on your toes and interfering with your plan, even by accident, I know some people aren't a fan of that. And for you, I say, cool, play this with 2 or 3 players. But I'm curious to see what happens when we up it to 4 or maybe even 5. And because if multiple people go to the same city, no one gets the cards. And in fact, those cards just go straight to manipulating the king's mood. So there's an interesting wrinkle there where maybe you don't even want the cards at City 3, but you know someone else does. And you know, if you go there at the same time as them, no one's going to get the cards, but it's going to push the king way into the mood for a comedy. And that's great news for you because 2/3 of your cards are comedy cards. So, hey, you know, it adds another layer of strategy and gameplay. And I'm really curious to try that, but perfectly happy with the play that I got, the more laid back gameplay that I had. And it's another one that I think of all the games I've talked about today, even though it's not the hardest, it's perhaps the game I think is the most suited for the gamer minded. You know, I don't know if this is the game I would reach for in casual play. I think today's video was full of a lot of games that are really easy to welcome new people to the table to. And again, Histrio is not complicated, but it's a little more gamery than anything else I've discussed today. So keep that in mind. But other than that, very enjoyable game. We're looking forward to playing it again. It stays in the collection for now. It is called Histrio. All right, so now it's time for me to crown my favorite game of today's playback. And I'm thinking it's really close between Sagrada and On Tour. I enjoy both a lot, but I'm going to have to give it to On Tour. While we really enjoyed Sagrada, On Tour is the game that we have revisited the most since that first play. We've gotten a handful of plays under our belts already and introduced it to a number of friends and family. So I'm going to go with that one. I think it's a little tougher to find or get your hands on. So if you're looking for something more readily available, don't count out Sagrada. But if you want something that scratches that itch of trying to piece together the perfect plan and being okay with the idea that maybe it won't come together, but you know, man, if it does, whoo, what a feeling. But yeah, On Tour wins today's playback. So that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll be releasing a few more playbacks in the near future. I've got a lot of games to get through. If you guys want to listen to my thoughts on more games, you can check out some of my previous videos, including my top 50 games of all time. I recommended some starter games that are under $20. Got a few more things on the channel, so check them out. Subscribe so you can see what I come out with next. I'm Justin. This is Out of Turn. See you guys next time.